A police pilot officer was shot down in the middle of a blizzard, her helicopter torn apart by gunfire, her loyal K-9 bleeding beside her in the wreck. The man who gave the order thought no one would ever find them. Not in this storm, not in these mountains. But miles away, in a lonely cabin buried beneath the snow, a Navy SEAL and his 2 young shepherds heard something. A faint cry carried through the wind. A cry that would uncover a secret buried deeper than ice. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and redemption. The storm over White River National Forest roared like a wounded beast, swallowing the night in endless white. The wind carried knives of ice that scraped across the pines and moaned against the wooden walls of a lonely cabin, buried deep within the mountains of Aspen, Colorado. Inside, Jack Nolan, a man carved from battle and silence, sat by the hearth cleaning the receiver of his old hunting rifle. At 37, Jack was all edges and quiet strength, his face angular, his beard trimmed close to hide the scar slicing through his jaw, and his eyes the color of gunmetal, always alert, always measuring. Years of Navy SEAL service had left their mark, a stillness that never fully eased, a discipline that refused to sleep, and a weariness that came from seeing too many things that refused to be forgotten. Beside him, 2 young German shepherds played on the wooden floor. Scout, the bolder of the pair, was a 5-month-old male with sandy brown fur and sharp black markings around his muzzle and eyes. His sister, Nova, slightly smaller and darker, was quick and observant. Her intelligence gleamed like amber in the firelight. They were born of the same litter, restless energy wrapped in thick winter coats, and they were Jack's only family now. He spoke to them more than to people. When the storm howled, he felt less alone because of their steady breathing. That night, Scout froze mid-stride, ears pricking toward the door. Nova followed suit, her tail stiff, a low rumble vibrating in her chest. Jack looked up. He had learned long ago that dogs sense what human instincts forget. A second later, he heard it too. A faint, distant concussion carried through the gale, something that did not belong to the mountain's voice. His pulse shifted. He rose, moving with the calm urgency of a soldier who never truly retired. He pulled on his insulated jacket and tactical snow boots, slung a thermal monocular over his shoulder, and stepped into the storm. The cold punched the air from his lungs. Snow swirled sideways, a blinding ocean of white, but Jack leaned into it, step by deliberate step, following the direction of that unnatural echo. It took him 20 minutes to crest a ridge. The wind peeled away the snow for a heartbeat, revealing a twisted shadow below. A police helicopter, broken clean in half, its tail buried in a drift, its cockpit ablaze with dying embers. Jack slid down the slope, boots carving tracks in the powder. The smell of burning metal and fuel clung to the wind. His flashlight beam cut through smoke and snow, landing on a shape inside the wreckage. A woman, slumped forward against her harness, her face pale and blood-streaked. She wore a dark blue flight jacket marked with the Aspen police insignia, the patch half torn by impact. Her nameplate read Maya Brooks. Her hair, chestnut brown and tangled with ice, clung to her cheeks. Even in unconsciousness, her expression was stubborn, like someone used to fighting until the very end. "Hang on," Jack muttered. His voice was deep but soft, a tone meant for people who might still be listening somewhere between worlds. He cleared the shattered glass and unbuckled her harness. A faint pulse fluttered beneath his gloved fingers. Then came another sound, a hoarse whimper. Jack turned the beam downward. A German shepherd, older and larger than his own pups, lay half buried under torn insulation. The dog's coat was sable, his right flank matted with blood, one paw twisted awkwardly. Yet even now he was conscious, jaws locked around something metallic, a collar, his own, gripped as though it were sacred. "Easy, boy," Jack said, kneeling. The dog's eyes met his, intelligent, pain-filled, defiant. That was no pet. That was a trained K9, a partner. Jack recognized the look. He'd seen it in combat dogs overseas, creatures that understood loyalty better than most men. Jack slid an arm beneath Maya's shoulders, lifted her with practiced strength, and hoisted her across his back. She was lighter than he expected, all tension and grit even in stillness. Then he gathered the wounded shepherd into his arms. Ranger, the tag on the collar read. The name suited him. Ranger trembled once, then went still, trusting this stranger as if some old instinct recognized kinship. The hike back was a crawl through white oblivion. The wind screamed, and the night pressed close. Scout and Nova darted ahead, their silhouettes small but fearless against the snow. Jack followed the faint line of their paw prints, each step heavier than the last. His thoughts narrowed to rhythm. One breath, one step, one more life to carry. He'd done this before, in other storms, under other skies, carrying other wounded souls out of fire. But this time there was no mission, no command, only conscience. By the time he reached the cabin, his beard was crusted with frost and his shoulders burned with exhaustion. He kicked the door open, stumbled inside, and laid Maya on the bearskin rug near the fire. Ranger he placed gently beside her. The two dogs inside bounded forward, sniffing the newcomers with anxious curiosity. Nova whimpered softly and licked Ranger's muzzle. Scout brought his muzzle close to Maya's hand, then barked once, sharp and low, as if calling Jack back from his thoughts. Jack worked quickly. He stoked the fire until the flames danced higher, spreading warmth into the chill air. Then he checked Maya's vitals again, weak but steady. He cleaned the blood from her temple and murmured to himself, "You're safe now, officer." He turned to Ranger, cutting away the frozen fur around the wound, dressing it with steady hands. The big dog endured it without a sound, eyes half closed, chest rising in shallow but rhythmic breaths. Outside, the storm roared on, but inside the cabin, time seemed to pause. The three dogs curled together near the hearth, their bodies pressed close, forming a ring of shared warmth. Jack sat nearby, back against the wall, watching the firelight play across Maya's face. Something in her expression, some quiet stubbornness, reminded him of every soldier who refused to give up. He wondered what story had brought her here, what secret had made someone shoot her out of the sky. But those were questions for the morning. For now, the only thing that mattered was that they were alive, surrounded by wind and ice and silence, and the fragile heat of hope. The fire in the stone hearth had burned low to a dull orange glow when Maya Brooks opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was made of rough-hewn pine logs, their surface cracked by years of mountain winters. It took her a moment to remember where she was, or who she was. Her body ached as though it had been carved from ice. The sharp scent of antiseptic and wood smoke filled her lungs. When she tried to move, something warm and heavy shifted against her leg. She looked down and found Ranger, his great head resting gently across her thigh, his fur bandaged and patchy where the wound had been cleaned. His chest rose and fell with labored steadiness. Nestled against him were two smaller shapes, Scout and Nova, curled into his side as though the older dog were their guardian. Their presence, 3 lives breathing in rhythm, was the first thing that made her believe she might still be alive. She tried to sit up, and the world tilted. Her head throbbed. Across the room, a man moved from the shadows. "Easy," he said, voice steady, measured, carrying the calm authority of someone who had seen panic too many times before. Jack Nolan knelt beside her, his dark jacket dusted with frost, his expression one of quiet vigilance. He handed her a steaming tin mug. "You're safe. You're in my cabin. You've been out for hours." Maya took the mug, her hands trembling. The tea burned her throat, but pulled her mind into focus. "The helicopter," she rasped. "Crashed," Jack said. "I found you near the ridge. You and your partner here." He nodded toward Ranger. She stared at the dog for a long moment before whispering, "He's not just my partner." Her voice cracked, the memory surfacing through the fog. "They shot us down." Jack's eyes narrowed. "You sure?" She nodded, and with that small motion, the dam broke. It wasn't the storm. The bullets came from below, from the valley road near the North Ridge. I saw the muzzle flashes before we lost power. Her voice trembled but carried a soldier's precision. They wanted it to look like a crash. Jack didn't interrupt. He had learned long ago that truth needed room to breathe. "The man who ordered it," Maya continued, staring into the fire, "was Lieutenant Mason Reed, head of the Canine Service Bureau, my commanding officer." Her tone hardened, bitter and hollow. "I trusted him. He trained me. He even gave me Ranger when I joined the aviation K9 unit. But a month ago, I discovered what he really was." Jack leaned forward, forearms on his knees, the firelight catching the faint scar under his jaw. "Go on." "He's been running shipments, illegal narcotics, unregistered weapons, hidden in the transport kennels of police dogs being moved across state lines. Nobody checks those units. He used his badge as cover." She paused, her eyes filling with exhaustion and disgust. "I collected the proof, bank transfers, shipping manifests, even a video file. I put it all on a micro SD card. But Reed found out. He tried to make it look like I cracked under stress. When that failed, he made sure my flight plan took me straight into an ambush." Jack's mind worked like a machine, facts aligning, angles forming. "You said you had the evidence. Where is it now?" Maya's hand trembled as she reached toward Ranger. "He's got it." She touched the dog's metal collar, now cleaned but still scarred by the crash. "I hid the SD card inside the inner seam of his tag before takeoff. He never leaves it." Jack studied the dog. Ranger's gaze met his, calm, unblinking, aware. It wasn't human intelligence, but something older, purer. "Then he's guarding the truth," Jack said quietly. For a while, the only sound was the storm gnawing at the cabin walls. Scout stirred and climbed onto Jack's lap, pressing his nose into the man's chest. Nova, ever the cautious one, crawled closer to Maya, her small body trembling from the lingering chill. Maya smiled faintly and ran a hand through Nova's fur. "They don't even know what they're protecting," she whispered. Jack shook his head. "Don't be so sure. Dogs always know." The warmth of the fire seeped slowly into the room. Jack began boiling more water, his movements deliberate, disciplined. Maya watched him, noting the quiet precision in everything he did, the same kind of precision she'd seen in soldiers who'd survived too many near deaths. You were military, she said softly. He didn't deny it. SEAL. Retired. Then after a pause, or maybe just tired. Maya looked back at Ranger, stroking the rough fur around his neck. We've both had bad commanders. Jack met her gaze, a brief flicker of grim understanding passing between them. Outside, the wind shifted. The howl became a low hum, the sound of snow settling, heavy but less violent. Jack stood and crossed to the window. The night was still white, but movement caught his eye. A shadow far out in the tree line, too deliberate to be the wind. He turned off the lamp, letting darkness reclaim the cabin. We've got company, he murmured. Maya tensed. Reed's men? Could be. They'll come quiet at first. Maybe they're not sure you're alive. Ranger's ears twitched. He rose stiffly, ignoring the pain, and limped to the door. Scout and Nova followed, small but alert, tails straight, eyes fixed. Jack admired the instinct. 3 generations of courage bound by something wordless. He retrieved his thermal monocular, scanning through the glass. 2 heat signatures moved near the edge of the clearing, too cautious to be hikers. They won't strike yet, he said finally. They're waiting for daylight. He glanced at Maya. We've got a few hours to plan. And to rest. Maya leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at her eyelids. But she didn't fight it this time. Ranger settled beside her, his head against her hip. Scout and Nova curled between them, forming a living bridge of warmth. Jack sat by the window, rifle within reach, eyes on the storm that hid both friend and enemy. He knew what was coming, the way predators circle before they pounce, the way truth draws danger, the way fire draws moths. For now, though, he let the silence breathe. The truth had awakened, and the hunt had already begun. Morning came reluctantly to the mountains, a pale gray light filtering through the storm's remnants. The wind had calmed, but the silence that followed was heavier than the night itself. Jack Nolan stood by the window, his breath fogging the frosted glass. The world outside looked peaceful again, a deceitful calm hiding the hunt beneath. Behind him, Maya Brooks sat wrapped in a wool blanket, eyes fixed on the flickering news feed from Jack's battered tablet, connected through his Iridium satellite phone. The connection was faint, pixelated, but clear enough to show Lieutenant Mason Reed, his face composed, his voice measured, the performance of a man who knew how to weaponize charm. Reed was in his early 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, with neatly combed black hair and a clean-shaven face that projected discipline. Yet behind the tailored police uniform and the calm blue-gray eyes was something serpentine. He spoke with the practiced cadence of a commander accustomed to public trust. "We are deeply concerned for Officer Maya Brooks," he declared, his voice laced with false empathy. "She has been under tremendous psychological strain and may be in possession of sensitive data she is not authorized to carry. We urge her, wherever she is, to surrender peacefully before anyone gets hurt." Maya clenched her fists, knuckles white. "He's painting me as unstable," she whispered. "He's turning me into the threat." Jack muted the feed, studying her face. That's how predators hunt in daylight. They make the world believe their prey is dangerous. Outside, the world seemed empty, but the faint hum of engines carried through the valley, snowmobiles moving in formation. Jack powered off the tablet, his jaw tightening. "He's coming." He moved with mechanical calm, checking the lock on the cabin door, his rifle, and the positioning of his traps near the perimeter. He'd done this before, in deserts and jungles, in countries that didn't officially exist. Ranger limped closer to the door, ears pricked. The big German shepherd's wounds had begun to scab, but his eyes burned with awareness. Scout and Nova, the young pups, shadowed him instinctively, two small bodies vibrating with excitement and fear. Jack knelt, scratching Ranger's neck. "You remember what danger smells like, don't you, old boy?" Ranger gave a low, resonant growl, his gaze fixed toward the tree line. Jack turned back to Maya. "You said you learned to fly before you learned to shoot. Time to balance that out." She frowned, wincing as her ribs protested. "You're serious?" He tossed her a training knife. "Dead serious. If Reed's men find us before help does, this place turns into a kill box. You fight to live, not to win." What followed was a silent choreography of survival. Jack moved with predatory grace, every motion precise and economical. He demonstrated how to redirect momentum, how to strike without hesitation, how to use the terrain as an ally. His voice stayed calm, his corrections blunt but patient. Maya tried to mimic him, her movements initially stiff, shaped by police training that prioritized restraint over aggression. He broke that habit with a single line: "Restraint is for law. Survival is for war." She hesitated when he lunged, instinctively raising her arms to block instead of countering. He seized her wrist, twisted her momentum, and in one smooth movement had her pinned, his forearm against her collarbone. "You think too much," he said. "When someone wants you dead, thinking gets you killed." They repeated the sequence again and again. Outside, the dogs watched with rapt attention. Scout mimicked Jack's movements, crouching and leaping forward like a soldier in training. Nova barked once, then tumbled sideways in an attempt to copy Maya's role. Even Ranger, lying on his injured leg, raised his head and let out a low bark of approval. When Jack called for a pause, Maya collapsed against the wall, panting, a sheen of sweat glistening under the firelight. "You teach like a man who doesn't believe in mercy." "I don't," he said simply, sitting beside her. His face softened slightly. "But I believe in redemption." The room fell quiet again. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the rhythmic breathing of the dogs. Maya broke the silence. "Why help me, Jack? You don't even know me." He stared into the flames for a long moment. "Because once someone pulled me out of the dark when no one else would. I didn't deserve it either." Outside, the snowmobiles drew closer. Their engines pulsed faintly through the trees like a slow heartbeat. Ranger's head rose again, his ears twitching. Jack stood and retrieved a small recorder from his jacket pocket, switching it on. The radio chatter from outside buzzed faintly, distorted but audible. Reed's voice cut through the static, calm and surgical. "Visual scan first. Negotiate if you have to. Then clean up." Jack's lips curved in a humorless smile. "He's predictable." Maya stared toward the window, her pulse quickening. "What's the plan?" "We give him what he's not expecting. Patience." Jack loaded a fresh magazine into his rifle, then nodded toward the recorder. "Every word he says is a confession if you know how to use it." The day dragged into evening. The snowmobiles circled but did not approach, engines echoing like ghosts. Inside, the cabin became a fortress of shared breath and firelight. Jack adjusted the stove. Maya leaned back against the wall, and the three dogs curled around her in a protective ring. Scout on her lap, Nova at her feet, Ranger keeping watch near the door. As night fell, the world beyond their walls seemed to disappear entirely. Jack sat by the window, listening. Maya dozed, head resting against the wood. The storm had given them one more night, but dawn would bring Reed's men. Jack knew it. The hunt was not over. It had only changed shape. Yet as he looked toward the hearth, at the fragile cluster of woman and dogs framed by flickering light, something steadied in him. For now, they were still breathing. For now, they still had each other, and that was enough to keep fighting for. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving behind a world sculpted in white silence. Snow hung heavy on the pine branches, and the air was sharp with the kind of cold that stung even through thick gloves. Inside the cabin, Jack Nolan stood at the window, his breath a slow mist. The dogs, Ranger, Scout, and Nova, were restless, moving in quiet circles, their instincts pulling them toward something beyond the walls. Maya Brooks sat by the fire, her face pale but composed, checking the magazine of the Glock Jack had given her. The bruise along her jaw had faded into a purple echo of pain, but her eyes were awake now, hard and lucid. Jack's old Iridium satellite phone rested on the table beside a small recording device, his last link to the outside world. He had already sent a coded burst message to the NCIS Denver field office and the Colorado Army National Guard stationed at Buckley Base, including their GPS coordinates. The reply had been brief but promising. Hold position. Help inbound when storm lifts. It was lifting now. From somewhere deep in the forest came the low, mechanical whine of engines. Not the random chatter of snowmobiles this time. These were moving in formation. Jack's jaw tightened. They're here. Maya rose to her feet, wincing as her ribs protested. Reed? Reed, Jack confirmed. He handed her a small transmitter. When things go bad, press and hold this for 5 seconds. It'll transmit our last known position on the emergency frequency. She nodded, gripping it tightly. And you? He gave a faint, humorless smile. I improvise. Outside, the first figures emerged from the tree line, dark shapes against the blinding snow. At their head walked Lieutenant Mason Reed, dressed in full winter tactical gear. Even beneath the heavy parka, his posture radiated authority, arrogance wrapped in politeness. His face, usually so camera-perfect, was dusted with frost. He carried himself like a man rehearsing for a victory speech. He called out, his voice amplified through a radio megaphone, smooth and falsely calm. Jack Nolan, I know who you are. I know what you did for your country. We're not here to fight. We just need to talk. Jack stepped onto the porch, snow crunching under his boots. He wore no insignia, no visible weapon. You've come a long way to talk. Reed smiled thinly. You have something that belongs to the state. Sensitive data that could cause unnecessary panic if misunderstood. Hand it over, and everyone goes home. His gaze flicked briefly toward the cabin door, toward Ranger. Jack's heartbeat slowed. You mean her dog, he said evenly. You're not after me. You're after what's in his collar. Reed's expression didn't falter, but the smallest muscle in his jaw twitched. You don't understand, Mr. Nolan. This isn't your fight. Jack's voice was steady. It is now. The wind shifted. In the distance, Scout and Nova stood by the window, ears forward, hackles raised. Ranger, despite his limp, moved to the doorway beside Jack, growling low, a sound that rolled like thunder. Reed sighed theatrically, spreading his gloved hands. Last chance. Don't make this difficult. Jack tapped the inside of his coat, where the recorder was clipped near his chest. Say that again, he murmured, almost to himself. When Reed gave the order, it came quiet but lethal. Breach! The explosion of the doorframe shattered the morning calm. Snow and splinters burst inward as 3 armed men in CSB tactical uniforms stormed the cabin. Jack moved like a shadow, muscle memory and instinct. His first strike caught the lead man mid-step, slamming a knee into his gut before twisting the rifle from his hands. The second attacker swung. Jack countered with a sharp elbow to the temple, then dropped him with a sweep of his boot. Maya ducked behind the stove, firing 2 controlled shots that shattered the lamp but forced their assailants back. Ranger lunged before Jack could stop him, his powerful jaws locking onto the arm of the man, raising his weapon toward Maya. The attacker screamed, his gun clattering to the floor as the dog dragged him down. Blood splattered across the snow. "Ranger!" Maya cried. But the old K9 held fast, even as a bullet tore past, grazing his flank. Scout barked wildly, circling to flank the downed man, while Nova crouched low, trembling yet ready to leap. The room became a blur of motion and chaos, snow swirling through broken windows, gunfire echoing like thunder against the mountain. Jack grabbed Maya's wrist. "Get down!" He fired once through the shattered doorway, catching a shadowed figure's shoulder. The man fell backward into the snow. Then, from somewhere above the tree line, came a sound unlike the storm, a deep, rhythmic whomp, whomp, whomp that vibrated through the air. Jack's head snapped up. "That's not theirs," he said. The sound grew louder until the world outside exploded in light. A Black Hawk helicopter roared over the valley, its floodlights sweeping across the snow. Through the white glare, dark figures rappelled down, soldiers in Arctic camouflage bearing the insignia of the National Guard. Behind them, a second aircraft with the NCIS emblem appeared, hovering like a silent witness. Reed froze mid-step, his plan disintegrating before him. His polished facade cracked for the first time, revealing the raw fury underneath. "You called them," he hissed. Jack's smile was cold. "You talk too much on open frequencies." Within minutes, the guard team surrounded Reed and his men. Shouts filled the clearing, commands, orders, the thud of boots in snow. Reed tried to protest, his voice rising. "You don't understand. This is a national security." But the NCIS agent leading the team cut him off, slapping cold steel cuffs around his wrists. Inside the cabin, Maya knelt beside Ranger. His breathing was ragged, blood staining his bandages. Scout and Nova pressed against him, their small bodies shaking. She stroked his fur gently. "You did it, buddy. You held the line." Ranger's eyes met hers, calm and resolute. Even as his chest rose weakly, there was peace in his gaze, like a soldier who knew his mission was complete. Outside, dawn began to break over the mountains, pale gold spilling across the snow. Jack watched as the guard escorted Reed away. His arrogance dissolved into silence. He turned back toward the cabin, where Maya held out the small, bloodied metal collar. Inside it gleamed a micro SD card, intact, unbroken. "Let's get this to Denver," she whispered. Jack nodded once. Justice first, rest later. And as the Black Hawk lifted into the glowing morning, the forest of White River stood witness to the quiet dawn of redemption. Spring came quietly to Aspen, like forgiveness whispered after a long silence. The mountains shed their white armor, rivers cracked open their icy veins, and the forest that had once howled with storms began to hum with birdsong again. The cabin that had been a fortress of survival now stood beneath melting icicles, its roof dripping with silver streams. Inside, the air was softer, filled not with fear, but with the sound of life returning. Maya Brooks stood by the open window, a file folder in her hands, sunlight touching her brown hair and catching on the faint scar above her eyebrow, a reminder of the crash. Her uniform was new, darker blue than before, marked with the insignia of her new division, Interagency Task Force on Corruption and Organized Crimes. Her posture carried the quiet authority of someone who had walked through fire and learned that mercy and steel can coexist. After the federal court's verdict, Mason Reed and his network of corrupt officers had been convicted on multiple felony counts. The headlines called it the K-9 Bureau scandal, but Maya knew it had been more than that. It was a battle for truth fought by those who could not speak, the loyal dogs who served without question. Behind her, Jack Nolan leaned against the doorframe, dressed in a khaki field jacket, his face tanned and sharper now that he'd begun to recover from his injuries. There was always something deliberate about his movements, like a man trained to live in silence between moments of chaos. He was preparing to leave. Orders had come from Washington to assist in a classified training program for the next generation of SEALs. But the way his eyes lingered on the dogs said he wasn't quite ready to go. Ranger, the elder German shepherd, lay near the porch, his coat now glossy again, though his left hind leg dragged slightly when he stood. He watched Jack with the steady calm of an old soldier. Scout and Nova, both grown into their full frames, strong, agile, and bright-eyed, wrestled near the edge of the yard. They were no longer pups, but young warriors in training, each carrying the same fearless heart their mother once had. Maya had decided to keep them with her, officially registering them as the first dual K-9 units under her new command. Jack whistled softly, and all three dogs lifted their heads. Ranger rose with a limp and walked over, pressing his muzzle against Jack's palm. "You've still got that look," Jack murmured, "like you're waiting for the next mission." Ranger gave a small, breathy huff, tail sweeping the floor once. Agreement, or maybe just understanding. Maya turned from the window, watching them. "He won't stop until you do," she said gently. "He's loyal to the last heartbeat." Jack smiled faintly. "That's why he reminds me of me." The humor faded into something quieter, heavier. Jack reached down, brushing his hand through Ranger's fur. "I've seen a lot of good men fall for the wrong cause. Reed wasn't the first. But you," he glanced at Maya, "you didn't run, even when it meant being hunted by your own." Maya's expression softened. "Maybe I didn't have a choice." "You always do," he said. "You just made the right one." Outside, the snowmelt gathered into rivulets that shimmered across the grass. Scout and Nova chased the reflections, splashing through the water like children in a playground. Their barks echoed off the valley walls, wild and joyful. Ranger stood beside them, raising his head high, the old injury forgotten for a moment as he barked once, deep, resonant, commanding. The two younger dogs immediately stopped, turned toward him, then ran back to his side as if answering a call older than language. Maya laughed quietly, the sound carrying through the morning air. "He's still in charge," she said. Jack nodded. "Every pack needs a leader, even when he limps." There was a pause, the kind that holds meaning instead of words. Then Maya said, "They'll miss you." He shrugged, but his eyes betrayed the truth. "They've got a job now. So do you." He reached into his jacket and took out a small patch, faded, embroidered with the seal trident. He placed it on the table beside her folder. "For when the world gets heavy, it's not a medal, but it'll remind you that some fights are worth it." A distant hum grew louder, the sound of rotor blades slicing through the air. A gray Navy transport helicopter descended beyond the tree line, kicking up a mist of melting snow. The sunlight flared off its metal skin, dazzling and cold. Jack picked up his duffel bag, slinging it over one shoulder. "Guess that's my ride." Ranger followed him to the porch. The dog's limp was more pronounced on the wooden steps, but his stance remained proud. Scout and Nova flanked him, sitting tall, ears perked. Jack crouched, running his hand down Ranger's back. "Keep her safe, old friend," he said. "And if she ever forgets the miracle we all saw out there, remind her it was real." Ranger pressed his nose against Jack's glove, one final promise sealed without words. Scout and Nova placed their paws on his boots, eyes bright, as if pledging their own vow. Maya stood a few feet away, the wind tugging at her uniform. "You'll come back?" Jack smiled, the kind that hides more than it says. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll just watch the snow and make sure it's still falling where it should." He turned toward the helicopter. The rotors beat faster, the sound deep and rhythmic, echoing against the mountains. As he boarded, Maya raised her hand in a salute that wasn't regulation, but from the heart. Ranger barked once, sharp and clear, as the helicopter lifted into the sky. The snow around them swirled upward in a glittering spiral, caught in the downdraft like a blessing. When the sound finally faded, Maya knelt beside the dogs. They turned toward her, their breath visible in the cool spring air. She smiled, whispering, "Come on, boys. We've got work to do." The mountains were alive again, and somewhere high above, a lone helicopter vanished into the horizon, leaving behind 3 dogs, 1 woman, and the echo of a promise kept beneath the thawing snow. Sometimes, miracles don't come as thunder or light. They come quietly, through a soldier who refused to stop helping, a woman who kept her faith when the world turned against her, and 3 loyal dogs who proved that love still guards the darkest night. Perhaps God doesn't always send angels with wings. Sometimes He sends them with fur, courage, and hearts that never doubt. In our own lives, too, storms will come, times when we feel lost or forgotten. But somewhere within that storm, there will always be a spark of grace waiting to be found, a hand that reaches out, a soul that refuses to give up, a heart that still believes. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope tonight. Leave a comment, subscribe, and may God bless you and everyone you love, because even in the coldest winter, His light still finds its way home.